The number one cause of weight gain is dieting. And the reason for that is, in this Western world where satisfaction, comfort, validation, dopamine is so easily accessible, when you deprive it, it's so much easier to just give up and go towards the things that are helpful. It's like putting a heroin addict in a heroin store.
Matty Lansdown, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sir Paul Taylor. What's going on?
Oh, I tell you what's going on. These fucking technology frustrations. I was just saying to you, I was just about to do a talk for the Cancer Council, and my internet just completely and utterly shut itself, which is lovely, isn't it? When it's 3 minutes before you're about to start a talk.
There's nothing worse. Nothing worse. So you open up an app and then something reboots or needs to update and it's like worst timing.
They were very understanding, and thankfully I know the CEO pretty well and she's great. So we're just rescheduling. But managed to get it up online for this podcast. So, mate, you're a nutritionist, you're a scientist, you're an international speaker, and you're also a podcast host. I've been on your podcast recently. And but you really focus in on the psychology of eating, and particularly around emotional eating. But let's really start from the top. Why do we seem to have such a big issue around food in the first place?
Oh, good question. And pretty easily answered. Dopamine, in the short, is the really short answer. We're in a world, and you are the expert of this world of comfort and discomfort, right? We're in a world where we don't have to do hard things and we can choose the easy option and not be socially judged for it and not be ridiculed. Whereas we think about, maybe several hundred years ago or thousands of years ago, by choosing a different option, you might be outcast from the small family or tribe that you were in. And so, whereas nowadays it's, if you don't go out and eat ice cream, you're the weird one, right? You're the odd person that's doing the healthy thing, whereas now everybody, it's sort of socially okay to join in, destructive behaviors, and everybody sort of champions you for that or bullies you into submission for not eating the thing or doing the thing. And so, I think fundamentally it's just that life's hard, life is overwhelming, it's difficult, it's challenging, people have trauma, and historically the way in which we dealt with that was to either swallow it or deal with it. And we might have had to deal with it head on with a sword or an axe. Or nowadays, we're so civilized and organized that yelling at somebody or saying what you think or releasing that energy or talking to somebody about it, it's like, just get on with it. We're busy, we're distracted. So the way that we heal those pains or sufferings or emotions or excessive cortisol and excessive adrenaline in our system, instead of burning it, is that we bury it. And often food is the lowest barrier to entry thing that we can go towards. We can go to the supermarket. It's not like alcohol or drugs where there's a clear line between addiction and you don't actually need those things to live. Whereas food, you need food to live. So it's a very grey, vague area.
That's a really good, there's lots of really good points that you just brought up, but people don't have to smoke. They don't have to drink alcohol, but we do have to eat, right? And that's the thing. And then we have more and more of this ultra-processed food, which, to go back to your first point about dopamine, gives the brain a nuclear reward that our human brain, like not all food. Food is supposed to be rewarding. We have that natural reward in the brain: food, water, sex, nurturing, achievement, all naturally release dopamine, which, as you well know, a lot of people say it's the pleasure chemical. It's not really. It's the chemical of motivation and goal-directed behavior. And when you have a Tim Tam, you have other chemicals in your brain going, "Oh, that's lovely." Dopamine's going, "Where's the rest of the packet?" Right?
Absolutely.
And I think this is a big part of the issue, is that there is so much of this ultra-processed food that hits the bliss point in the brain, right? Which is this delicate balance of either salt and sugar or salt and fat or fat and sugar or salt, fat and sugar, like any two of those things in the right balance hits the reward pathway. And Pringles have nailed it, right? For all ultra-processed foods, once you pop, you can't stop.
Yeah, they're literally advertising their addictiveness.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, that's right. But it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that when we eat those foods that just taste amazing, they are moreish, right? And you do want more of them, and they're designed like that. And we get a reward. We get a soothing of our stress or a soothing of our anxiety, which then reinforces the behavior, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a vicious cycle because the other element of that is that whilst, I guess, do the emotional binge overeating work from fundamentally a psychological standpoint first, there's also the nutritional element, which is that when you put in food, and they've done, there's a group of, I'm going to blank on their names, but there's a group of evolutionary biologists that have done this work in looking at multiple species, all the way down to flies, locusts, up to mammals, humans as well. All species overeat carbohydrates to hit their protein quota.
I interviewed the guys on my podcast, 2 guys from Sydney.
Yeah. They're coming on to my show soon.
Yeah, they are brilliant. Rushback or something. I can't remember their names. But
I always forget their names.
But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And that's showing that all species will eat and continue to eat until they hit the required amounts of protein. And if you look at ultra-processed foods, they are not protein heavy because protein's expensive, right?
And it stops you eating the product.
That's right. Actually, you know what? I never thought of that. That's true.
Yeah. You get to the end of the bag of a protein-filled thing, and you need less willpower to manage going back, and you're satiated. So you don't go back to the food. You don't buy another one.
That's the thing, because my go-to snack would be different types of biltong or meat sticks, because I just find you eat it and then you're good, right? And you don't need any more. That's a very good point, actually, that I'd never factored in. But I think one of the other things, just before we dive into the whole emotional eating thing, and you mentioned it, the way that we are with society now, is this... It's more than an acceptance. It's almost become an encouragement of larger bodies. And it's well-intentioned. I get it. It's well-intentioned, and it's about not body shaming. And I'm 100% behind that, right? So I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying. But what we're doing is that we're normalizing being overweight and being obese. And what people don't realize is the multitude of health benefits that come into that. But it's also then that normalizes overeating, to your point earlier on. And that then when you get into that pathway, it's so bloody hard to get out of, right?
Yeah, and I would agree with you. Happy at every size, awesome. Worthy at every size, lovable at every size, amazing. Healthy at every size? No, not at all. And that number, there's a number that's going to be different for everybody, or a set of compositions or statistics or information that will be slightly different for everyone. But I think we deal these days with such on an individualistic basis of, don't hurt this individual's feelings, don't hurt this person, don't do that kind of thing, whatever it is. We're protecting the individual, but we live in a society. And so if we don't take a societal lens or a community focus, then we are blind to the consequences, and the consequences on a bigger scale. And when we get into this kind of macro thinking, it's hard to relate to. So I get why people don't think about it, but we have a reduction in the productivity of society. We have more sick days at work. We have interest rates and things that go up as a consequence. We have more people that use the system that we pay, the medical system, of which we all pay tax. Are we going to get to a point where I get to pay less tax because I'm healthy? Probably not, right?
Yep,
and so
correct.
There's other macro ways that this comes into the conversation and degrades society if we champion the healthy at every size and obesity celebration with, celebrities and role models that just, and, even I did a podcast yesterday with a clinical psychologist that's in this world as well. And, the movement on YouTube of mukbang, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's there's people that earn millions and millions of dollars just eating on camera. They're like in the most disgusting, foul ways you can ever imagine. And it's this public championing of bigger bodies, of terrible food behavior. And sure, half the audience are watching because they're saying, oh, this guy's like me. And the other half are watching because they're like, can you believe this is real?
Yeah, they're kind of, it's like you're watching a car crash and you can't stop, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. But this just sort of illustrates that there's this huge movement. And you go into any of these videos, 5 million views, 10 million views, they're earning millions of dollars in ad revenue. But again, it's just this normalization of a greater number of people in society saying it's okay to be like this. And as an individual, you do you. If you're going to be part of my society, though, I think we should level up.
Yeah. Look, I completely agree on that. And research came out just this week. I mean, it's research that we kind of all get intuitively, but for the first time, they have realized how being unhealthy physically damages the brain and your mind. And it appears to be that all organs send signals to each other. And so an unhealthy liver actually creates an unhealthy brain. An unhealthy pancreas creates an unhealthy brain. And it's through these inflammatory messengers and other metabolic messages that actually changes the way that the brain actually works and drives a whole host of mood disorders, right? And, I've been talking about the interactions between the body and brain for decades, but now we're starting to see real evidence behind the fact that when you are unhealthy, and this isn't just overweight, this is unfit as well, that it actually damages organs, and those organs can send signals that damage other organs as well. So we started to see there's this knock-on effect at an ecosystem level that is really concerning, because then you have neurological conditions, you get neurodegenerative diseases, but you also get mood disorders, right? And you talked about productivity. The biggest driver of presenteeism or disability-adjusted life years is actually mood disorders. Depression is the single biggest, right? And so that healthy body equals healthy mind, we have now really seen it. And that when your body is not healthy and not fit, that damages your organs, which then there's this knock-on effect where they start to damage each other, including the brain.
Well, and I think further down the chain of this conversation of poor mental health, depression, anxiety, mood disorders, that type of thing, is the idea that in the absence of exercise, because a lot of people think exercise is about getting skinny.
Yes, it drives me mad.
Yeah, right. And in some parts of your journey or the individual's journey, it might be about that. But the other thing is that if we get to the mood disorder conversation, and also acknowledging that all the chemicals and all the terrible shit that's in the ultra-processed food is also contributing to degradation of the brain and the body, but the absence of physical biological resilience from not exercising, not lifting something heavy, is also a contributing factor to that lack of resilience in the workplace or in the environment. And then to sort of circle back to where we were, is this super individualistic, always offended society that has no resilience whatsoever, right? Because, you can probably tie it all into the same loop. If they've never lifted something heavy, they've never done something hard, and never's a big overarching broad term, but you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And mate, I am in complete violent agreement. I like to talk about psychophysiological resilience, right? Which is this body-brain resilience. And you can't be resilient just by doing positive thinking. Like there's this toxic positivity shit that's out there that drives me nuts. That you have to condition the body and condition the mind by doing challenging stuff, because the biggest benefit of exercise is that it's a stressor and it stimulates the body to have positive adaptations. And that's just like the mind. And who was it? It was one of the Stoic philosophers said that, and I'll paraphrase here, but just like labor is good for the body, dealing with difficulties toughens the mind as well, right? But it is this culture that we're in where it is all about trying to minimize our stress, and then about soothing your stress with either alcohol, drugs, or food. And I think the issue now is that this stuff is all around us everywhere, right? I mean, alcohol and drugs were always available to a certain extent, but I think the change in the composition of our food in the last 30 years is just massive. I'll just open that up for comment from you around that topic. Like, how big do you think the changing composition of the food and the ultra-processed food is as part of our overall problem?
Oh, I would say a huge part of the problem. Percentage-wise, I don't know. It's going to be different for everyone. 50%, maybe it's 50% movement, 50%, what's going in, which also includes unfiltered water, the air that we breathe in cities. There's a whole rabbit hole of detoxification to go down there. But the food is the thing, and this is why I'm sort of in this world of this combination of psychology and nutrition, because both of those things are things that are within our reach to do something about, and just as exercise is as well. And we've got to eat. So, unless we want to just die, we don't have a choice. We've got to eat. Whereas the other things, we've got a choice as to whether we do or don't, or etc. But yeah, I think it's enormous. The vegetable oils, one of the biggest destroyers of the brain and nervous system as well.
Talk us through that, mate. So there will be, my listeners will have heard me say I'm not a fan of vegetable oils. So talk us through the process by which they can become damaging for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's what's referred to by Kate Shanahan, who, for anyone that can see the videos, I've got a couple of her books on my shelf over here, but she's put out Deep Nutrition and Dark Calories. Both of them have several hundred studies. The Deep Nutrition has over 1,600 studies in it referencing vegetable oils, or as she refers to them, the Hateful Eight. So we're talking about canola oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, and corn oil. And the reason, so first and foremost, all of those minus corn are not vegetables whatsoever. They're nuts and seeds. And that was a marketing decision made in about the early 70s to call them vegetable oils. And then in order to get any of those nuts and seeds, and if you think about any of those nuts and seeds, if you crush them or bite into them, do you ever produce a liquid?
No. Yeah.
No, right? So it's got to go through a heavy amount of processing to get the oil that is in those out of them. And depending on the manufacture process, it's somewhere between 30 and 70 steps of manufacture. And those manufacture steps...
30 to 70 steps?
Yeah, depending on the business and the factory in China and or Malaysia and or insert location.
Holy shit.
But that's because they're not very nice. Because 3 of those steps include coloring. So, you walk down the aisle at the supermarket, the cooking oil, and it's just this beautiful golden syrup.
Yes.
It's like, it's just amazing. But they have to color them because they're disgusting colors. They're like sludge when they're going through the first couple of steps of squeezing the oil out of them. They have to deodorize them because they smell awful. And then they have to flavor them. They add flavors in as well to make sure that they are, consumable by humans. And of course, slapping on the label that says vegetable oils, everybody hears vegetable, we think health. But along this process, it goes through many phases of increased heat, far higher than you would achieve in your kitchen.
Yeah.
And what that does to the oil is it oxidizes it. So it denatures it and breaks it, and an oxygen molecule attaches to it, which means now it's not in a helpful form. And many people will have heard of smoke points and, you've got to use certain oils for certain temperatures. That's because at a certain temperature, these oils change shape and they become no longer helpful.
And that can actually be a selling point for them. They have a high smoke point, right? And so that was the whole thing when they realized that trans fats were unhealthy, that, let's do these vegetable oils because they have a higher smoke point. But what most people don't realize is they become a completely adulterized to that point that you actually get them. So before you even start to cook with them, they are completely adulterized. And the research shows that when you heat an unsaturated fat, it actually gives off toxic aldehydes at a much higher level than a monounsaturated or a saturated fat, right? This is something that people don't really understand.
Absolutely. And actually, many of the bottles of vegetable oil, if you've got one in your cupboard and you're listening right now, will have somewhere on it a line that says that there's not a great deal of evidence that supports the use of these for heart health, which is just wild, because it's like, in the tiniest writing, there's a random sentence, particularly in the USA, it's got the FDA comment of like, there's insufficient evidence to say that these are any good for heart health. Yet, they are promoted by the American Heart Association all of the time. And so So I guess, and then the question becomes, well, what next? And then we move towards things that have been used for a millennia: beef tallow,
Yep.
lard, suet, which you can get off making broth or cooking, but you can buy it from a butcher. That type of thing. Olive oil's good for sort of mid-range temperatures. The place I always move to the space where there's the least amount of debate in the research and with professionals. And in my opinion, the least amount of debate happens with avocado oil as the thing to cook with the hottest temperatures that you can achieve in your kitchen. And actually, my sister's a head chef, and there's a few sort of famous French chefs that always cook with avocado oil for that reason as well, that she follows. It doesn't damage. And because if you're thinking, French cuisine and flavor, when that damage happens to the oil, it changes the flavor, right?
Yes.
It impacts the flavor. The other thing to mention, which is going to sound a bit conspiratorial, but there's been documentaries that have gone over this. But when you've got food grade products that go on the shelf of supermarkets, you don't have to be super clear about what goes into them. And so there was an olive oil sort of test done in multiple locations at ports in the world where giant shipments were coming in, and they were finding that some of these fully branded olive oil glass bottles actually had up to 70% cottonseed oil in them. So they'd been diluted to save money. And that's happened in the honey industry as well. It's happened in multiple industries where food grade products, you don't have to be, again, super honest or clear. And it also can preserve it a little bit longer, because once the oil is oxidized, it doesn't have much more changing to do. So it means it's more stable on the shelf, it lasts longer, which is exactly why vegetable oils are used in all of the bag-o-box or canned foods that you can buy anywhere, because it keeps them shelf stable and it does the oxidizing instead of the food oxidizing itself.
Yeah, interesting. Now, the olive oil, I had read that research, and actually the mafia are massively involved in olive oil. And that's why I say to people, if you're going to buy olive oil, which we use heaps of olive oil, we also have avocado oil, and we have lard, and we have ghee. And
nice.
Ghee's
great.
Yeah, and so I always say to people, if you're cooking a steak, that's when you need something that is saturated fat, right? Because I think helping our listeners to understand this, saturated means it's saturated with carbon bonds, which means it's more stable under heat. So I always say to people, you're going to buy olive oil, which I highly recommend that you do. Get extra virgin olive oil, but buy Australian produced olive oil, because the import stuff is the stuff that is highly, I don't know if you've seen anything to the contrary about Australian extra virgin olive oil, but that's the stuff that I tend to buy. Hopefully you're not going to tell me that it's diluted as well.
Well, I haven't seen anything, no. And I mean, not that this is possible for many people, and, you and I work in this world of health, but, if the farm's somewhere that you can drive past, or they're a business that has some kind of shop front or open door policy, that's sort of a green flag for me. And sort of, we've got brands here in Victoria that allow you to sort of go there, and you can go to the farm where the olives are picked. And
yeah.
And so the more of that we have, the more transparency in the farming practices, for me, that's a green flag. It's like if anybody can pull off their road trip and go and visit one of these places and see what's done. Sure, a lot of the time we don't know what we're actually looking at, but it's interesting. But that's sort of a look in the right, sort of a tick in the right direction, if you like.
Yeah, cool. Okay, let's not, because we could talk about this stuff all day, but I think the basic is don't buy friggin' vegetable oil. It's bullshit, right? And don't listen to all the nonsense that's out there. Let's now talk about emotional eating. So you're much closer to this than I am. What sort of incidents of this do we think? Like, how common is it? I mean, I before you answer that question, I always say to people when I'm in workshops, when you're stressed, who goes for alcohol? Who goes for food? The people who go for food, is it celery sticks and carrot sticks, right? And it's obviously not, because our brains have worked out to this point how to deal with stress. And my brain basically goes, I'll sort that shit out. Just bring me a bottle of wine and we're all good, right? But we have those learned responses to stress, right? But how common do you think it is amongst most males and females?
I think it's more common in females, but it's equally terrible in men. Like, it's not like it's only 1% of men. I think, a lot of women have challenges in that space, and there's a lot of reasons. Equally, men, we just have to look at the average tradie now. If we go to a construction site, once upon a time, in the Western world at least, you go to a construction site and that was the big burly men, right? That was the guys that were jacked, they were naturally ripped, they're lifting concrete all day. And now you think, oh, I go to a construction site and it's sort of the overweight guys, So, and smoko is, pies and that kind of thing. You go to the hamburgers and whatnot and cans of Coke and stuff like that.
Mate, the amount of times I go to the airport early and I stop in to get petrol and there's a bunch of tradies coming in and they're buying sausage rolls or pies from those petrol stations and 2 cans of V or 2 massive cans of Mother. And I'm thinking, holy shit.
Yes. Yeah, but and you could obviously kick off a debate around whether it's emotional eating or whether it's just what we've got access to, which is a fair argument because the system's not working in anyone's favor, right? But yeah, I think it's more common in women, but also, I get plenty of men reach out. I've worked with a bunch of men in this space. And I guess, the reason that it is so common, I would say first and foremost, is actually less about human resilience and more about the system that we are a part of. You go to the supermarket, you're hit with all of these advertisements and colors, and the supermarket design is laid out by psychologists, behavioral psychologists, so they can successfully, manipulate your behavior there unconsciously. And, we've got kids shows and billboards and advertising, social media, I am a nutritionist and I put on my YouTube workouts, which I've been doing for years, and I still get hit with KFC ads all the time.
Right.
I'm like, my behavior has not shown in the data, in the algorithm, why is this relevant to me? But I still get hit with those ads,
Interesting thing about supermarket layouts, just a little comment. I did a bunch of work with a food manufacturer over in New Zealand. I shall remain nameless, but I was working with a leadership team and we're having a discussion, which I was privy to, about one of the large supermarkets wanting them to produce very cheap home-branded bread. And there was the negotiation around it. And it was like, well, if you do this for us, we will give your products the best shelf space and particularly the stuff at the end of the aisles. Because the stuff that's at the end of the aisles is the stuff that sells the most. And those products are generally paying to be placed there, right? There's so much psychology in the supermarkets, and also that they know that kids are often have the purchasing power. So a lot of the shit food is down at kids' eye heights as well, right? There's just, there's so much stuff goes into this.
Oh, even cereal box design. So you'll notice that cereal obviously has characters.
Yes.
And that's because children relate to characters.
Should not be selling food.
But if you notice their eyes, often, if you look at the boxes, the eyes are pointing down, right, in the design, because the children are looking up, right?
Interesting.
So manipulative.
Just ridiculous. Anyway, so we were talking about emotional eating. So if somebody does emotionally, and look, I presume there is a continuum around emotional eating.
Yeah.
From, I like to have chocolate because it's nice, to this is where I go, my go-to when I'm stressed. And so talk us through that continuum and where does it really start to become problematic?
Yeah, you're totally right, because there's a whole dialogue around, is emotionally eating always bad, right?
Mm.
And I would say no, because culture, tradition, social cohesion in particular scenarios, all of those things are important. And for a millennia, we have gathered around tables and celebrated and welcomed people with food because it's a resource, because humans need it. And so it's of value. And so it's important, right? And sometimes we get clients come through our programs that are sort of, and I'm going to use arbitrary numbers, but say, I want to lose 20 kilograms. And it's like, amazing. Okay, let's do that. But then we sort of do a bit of the emotional analysis, and the Friday night pizza night with the boys or my kids or whatever, that is that is not worth giving up, right? That is such an important social cohesive memory making happiness, sort of situation that it's like, well, actually, maybe the goal needs to be 15 kilos, right? And so that's going to be different for everybody. And as you said, where does it become harmful? Where's the line on that sort of spectrum? And I would say for most people is, you need to decide that for yourself. When does it become harmful? Because sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's harmful. And there's nothing worse than giving the brain two sets of rules for the same food, which is the idea that on Saturday night at a birthday party, cake's okay, but Monday's not. So it's like, hang on, so the same food is bad and good? That's kind of confusing, right? When we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're busy, we don't want those things in the brain. We don't want those confusing scenarios. So my approach personally is basically that we destigmatize all food and we just check in with how our body feels. Like, do I feel healthy? Do I feel okay? Right? And so that we're not stigmatizing food, because when we stigmatize food, it triggers people's rebellion. A lot of people either had parents that were really restrictive, or they've got a partner that's restrictive.
Yes, and they go the other way, right?
Yeah, or food is the only place in their life where they feel like they can rebel and break the rules because everything else.
Right.
Or another way to look at it is food is another place where the core human need of variety is being met. Life is, I'm stuck in my job that I hate because of the mortgage. I'm in a marriage that's not going well. The kids drive me crazy. I need something else. And so food is the access point of variety, right? And it's like, oh, I can have a bit of this today or a bit of that today, but the rest of my life is mundane and boring.
Grey. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so many ways in which we enter this conversation, because a lot of people hear emotional eating and they think super depressed woman on the couch who got dumped by a boyfriend eating ice cream,
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the stereotype. So when we think of where this thing starts, right, I think we all probably grew up with food as a reward, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it's that whole, you've been good so you can have ice cream, or you've been good so you can have chocolate. Like, how much does that play a role in all of this, and that then subconscious association of food with reward? How big is that in all of this? Or is it just like, that's just is what it is?
Well, I think it starts as one thing and it evolves over time, which is that it starts for some people in that idea of reward, and that means they've got approval, they're doing the right thing, they're moving in the right direction, and maybe that they're, we're talking about adults now, maybe they're trying to access that sense of love or acceptance that they felt from their father in that moment, which outside of that moment, he wasn't very loving. Right?
Yeah.
And the thing about trying to eat memories is that you can't eat the past, right?
I love it.
It can be situations like that where we're trying to, access these feelings which we once felt before. But we're moving in this space, I guess, of trying to recreate it, and instead we're rewarding ourselves. But the reward evolves into something new, which is life is hard, so I'm going to reward myself all of the time, rather than I did the good thing, now I deserve a reward. And so where it started is maybe not how it's showing up now, but it is this idea of, that dopamine hit or that particular food or that particular wine always reminds me of this scenario where I got validated at 7, but now it's got a different meaning, which is that everything is hard and nobody cares about me, and I'm ignored. And I hear this a lot from mums because they're running the household, they're looking after hubby, looking after the kids, they're forgotten about. And so the only time where I'm prioritized is when the wine cares about me. Or the chocolate cares about me.
Me time. Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we get into some strategies around emotional eating, because I do want to get into that, when people have an unhealthy relationship with food, 99 times out of 100 they're going to put on weight. And then very often they're then going to go, okay, I need to go on a diet. And they go on a diet for a certain period of time, realize that diet is unsustainable, then come off the diet, back to their habits, and then kick the can down the road for X amount of time, and then we're back on it. Why is that cycle? And we all know these people, right, who their diet's pretty crap, and then they will just go on a diet, or they'll go on the shakes for a couple of months, and then they'll lose weight, and then they're back to their original diet again. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, the number one cause of weight gain is dieting, right?
There you go.
And the reason for that is, in my opinion, in this Western world where like satisfaction, comfort, validation, dopamine is so easily accessible, when you deprive it in a space where you haven't understood the underlying psychological drivers of your behavior, it's so much easier to just give up and go towards the things that are helpful. When it's like, it's like putting a heroin addict in a heroin store and saying, don't shoot up. It's like, good luck, So that's how I think about it, is that when you're on a diet, you're basically walking around to the supermarket, going to events, going to parties, and you're surrounded by this, this stuff that you really, really want. And so you think about it like a spring, that you're pushing tighter and tighter and tighter. And then at some point, whether it's a week, whether it's that afternoon, whether it's 3 months down the track, that spring, eventually, the tension seeks release. And that's because we haven't worked on the underlying motivators and drivers, some of which are nutritional, some of which like we talked earlier, you're just not getting enough protein in your diet, which is super common. That happens to a lot of people, even people that, describe themselves as healthy eaters. And then the other part of it is the psychology, and that is why do I go towards this dopamine, when I'm not hungry, when I don't need food, even if I've eaten a steak for dinner, am I still looking for something sweet afterwards? Was there nutrition missing from dinner? Or, am I just so knackered and worn out that I need something sort of materialistic or to push the biological cortisol back down, rather than do something that's truly calming, which is breath work or meditation or, because a lot of the things we add in, even though in the moment the dopamine and serotonin and that cocktail makes us feel good, they are inevitably just more stress on the pile of stress.
You feel shit later on, and then you've got regret and all of that. I will never forget doing my master's, nearly 25 years ago in nutrition, and them talking about a research study from Yale University where they had identified that people who were on diets suffer from, and you described it beautifully with the spring, they are in constant high cognitive dietary restraint, which is a geeky academic way of saying I'm obsessing about the stuff that I'm not eating, and I'm obsessing about it all the time, and eventually that obsession becomes so much that as you say, the spring just goes boom, and then they're off the diet. Now, physiologically, I think that becomes a massive issue, right? Because when people go on a calorie restricting diet, they will lose water first, as you well know, then they'll lose muscle, and then they'll lose some fat. And then when they realize their diet is unsustainable, they put the water on quite quickly, or the water will balance out after a while unless you're on a really low carb diet. But the water comes back on, then fat comes on and the muscle doesn't come back. And then you get back to your normal weight, 80, 90 kilos, whatever it might be, but you're proportionally more fat and less muscle. That means your resting metabolic rate is lower. So you go back on the same habitual diet and you actually put on some weight. And then you end up at a higher weight eventually after the diet. And then you go through the bloody cycle again, right? And we end up being really low in terms of our muscle. And that causes sarcopenia and osteopenia, which in themselves are horrendous, right? So people are just, by constantly going through this cycle, they're actually making their body composition worse and worse as they age. And then they hit friggin' middle age and then the wheels come off.
Well, in that process, you're also dysregulating your thyroid, which regulates 60% of your metabolism.
Great point. Do a bit of a dive on the thyroid, because there's a lot of people out there who go, I put on weight because my thyroid is not working properly. Where does it all start?
Yeah, well, the thyroid's responsible for a significant portion of your metabolic rate. And so if you start sort of pushing it to extremes, it starts to downregulate your metabolism. And the reason, which makes it harder and harder to lose weight as you go. And that's sort of the group of people that I work with have often been on a diet for somewhere between 10 to 30 years in some variation. And each time you go into a hyper-restrictive calorie diet, you tell the thyroid and the evolutionary sort of markers in your body that, hey, we've been here before historically in our genome, and whenever there's a famine, whenever there's not much around, we need to lower the metabolic rate to save the fat that's on the body. And this might be the person that's like, every time I go on a diet, I don't lose anything. You might be at that point, right? Because the thyroid and other parts of your body are sort of saying, we need to hold on to this as long as we can, because if we're going to go through a famine, then, we need to survive it. And then you add back in all of the food when you decide to either give up, or you're sick of the restriction, or you've changed your mind on what you want to do. And then in this lower metabolic state, we've just added tons of calories that are also saying to your system, hey, the famine's over, quick, grab everything, put it in storage so that we're not here again in this situation. And so that's why we gain the weight back so suddenly and often more than when you began in the beginning. And over that time, you can really damage the thyroid and end up needing, drugs because your T3, T4 are sort of out of whack. And they're common tests that GPs will do these days because so many people have thyroid issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you add in psychological stress into that as well, from just life in general, and then psychological stress about my weight. And that then further impacts hormones and all sorts of stuff. Now, this has been very depressing to this point for the listener, right? Listening to us two rip on about how people are completely destroying themselves. So let's throw our listener a rope so that they can clamber back out. So where do you start with people around who have issues around food that are largely psychological, which most people's issues with food are generally?
Yeah, so simply getting them to change nothing in the beginning, which is that we do a bit of a stock take of the normal life. Because the way I think about it is, if you pull over and your car's smoking from the bonnet and you don't lift the bonnet up, you don't know what's wrong. You don't know what we need to fix. You're just like, oh, my car's ruined. And it's like, well, is it your car or is it the fuel pump, right? And so we need to figure out where the fuel pump is in your life, which is we need to document food that I eat, what do I eat? It doesn't matter what you eat. It's just we're documenting it. And then we follow it up with where was I? What's the location? And what are the emotions that I'm feeling? And many people in that phase will realize they don't actually know what emotion they're feeling. That they're often not in a situation or have never been in a situation where they have been guided to feel their stuff and know what it is. Like, is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it happiness? What's going on? So we want to collect that location, food, emotion, because first and foremost, we want to identify where's the problem. Where is the problem? What is the problem? Because Saturday night cake, birthday party, probably not a problem. But Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning cake might be unhelpful. Yeah. Right? And so we need to figure out where that problem is. And then once we know what it is, and usually in that first couple of weeks of just self-awareness practices, people start to realize they're like, oh, I always eat chocolate when I'm tired. Or I always drink wine when I've had a bad day. And, we're just trying to make these patterns really obvious. And then we sort of dig into the why the wine or why the chocolate is the solution. And that could simply be circumvented, like we've already talked about, by getting the lunch or the meal before correct. Yeah. Or diving into all of the emotional reasons why chocolate's a good idea in that particular moment. So it's very methodical in the sense that we look at the past, find what's broken, deep dive on that. And sometimes, to be totally honest, that can end up at, I was sexually traumatized at 5.
Yeah.
That can be some really heavy stuff. But I'm not one of those people that's like, everyone's got trauma, we're all broken. Sometimes it's like, oh, I just got this idea from Cadbury marketing and it's happened for 40 years,
And it's so lovely, I can't stop, right?
Yeah. Sometimes that's it, And I would even argue that's sometimes more difficult to work on because there's not much to heal there.
Yeah.
But some of the deeper stuff we can make significant shifts with, because once we start reconciling and healing and just giving voice to some of this stuff which has been suppressed for so long, that we're using food to suppress. Literally, the physical action of eating is like stopping words from coming out of our mouth. If we think about that more like in a philosophical sense, we're plugging the hole that would verbalize the problem. And Freud talks a little bit about it as well in regards to, the fixation that we have with the mouth and putting things in the mouth to stop things coming out. And
interesting.
Yeah. There's some really great psychological analyses on that obsession with our mouth. But anyway, so we look at the past, figure out why it's here. Learn a bit of emotional literacy and start getting people to connect with emotions and understand their emotions and give sort of labels to their emotions, which helps people feel much more in control of themselves if they can identify what is happening inside me.
That name it to tame it thing, right? Where acknowledging an emotion and actually saying to you, either saying out loud, if there's not people around you who are going to think you're bonkers, or just saying it in your head, what emotion you're actually feeling, actually reduces the intensity of the emotion, right? So I love that you bring that in. And then around the whole built environment, right? What are your tips around that? And I'll give you a little story just to give you a bit of time to think about this, because these questions are not scripted at all, right? We're freewheeling. But years ago when I was boxing, and my long-standing issue, never really been an issue with food, but alcohol, being Irish and ex-military, right? Which again, gives you an excuse to do the stuff that you shouldn't really be doing. But alcohol was the thing that I really had to cut down. And I found that changing the way that I walked home was really important, because I would walk home past Dan Murphy's, and there would be times that I'd be walking home, and I even had a boxing training session, feeling really good, and I'm walking home and I walk past Dan Murphy's, and then all of a sudden I find myself walking out of the shop with a bottle of wine without even thinking about it, right? So that habitual thing. And then I took it a step further of just getting alcohol out of the house. And then it became a case of, well, if I want to drink, I've got to really, really want to drink, because I've actually got to go out of the house and go and get it. And I would only buy enough for that evening, right? So that kind of lands in, that's leading the witness a little bit around strategies for people around their built environment to help them to manage food. What sort of things do you do or recommend?
Yeah, exactly what you described is changing the way that you walk home, changing the way that you drive to and from work. You know, if you drive home past KFC and you smell it and you're just like, oh, you know what, amazing, let's go. When you're tired and worn out, you know, you've got to go a different way maybe. Even things like changing up the way that your house is laid out. And I know that sounds silly, but if you've been in the same house and same environment where the problem happens for 25 years or even 3 years, it might simply be rearranging the lounge room, you know, so that you're psychologically, it's a different space. It's a new chapter. We've changed something.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. And that extension goes to the bedroom. It even goes to, and this is like a big concept or like a big step, but some people during this process of going through the work that I do, a lot of it is sort of reclaiming themselves, is that they've been violating their boundaries and not respecting themselves for a long time. And what comes with that sometimes is the cutting out of family members or people that are really destructive, that are, you know, not being nice to you. And sometimes that can lead to people finding their voice and saying something they've never said to someone for 20 years. And, you know, because we're pack animals, and fundamentally we want to have a sense of belonging, because that means evolutionary safety, survival. And so once you build up a bit of courage, and also you're starting to identify your values with a new group of slightly healthier people, you might think, oh, I actually don't need that person that's been by whoever that's been bringing me down my entire life, or telling me that I'm awful, or that good things will never happen to me, or my abusive husband, or, you know, and sometimes they're the reasons why we're eating. You know, is that we're just perpetuating the information or the belief that they've pumped into our head. So rearranging our physical location, the relationships in our life that might need attention as well, because that just is another layer of our environment. Could be finding a new job. You know, maybe you're unexcited, you hate your job, and so the excitement you get is at, you know, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. when everybody walks down to get coffee and cake. You know, that's the excitement of the day, right?
Yep. Another interesting little tip is to put healthy food right at the front of the fridge and the pantry, because the research shows you're much more likely to eat the first thing that you actually see. So hiding the stuff, you know, ideally you'd have most of that shit out of your house. And by the way, stop frigging blaming your children for your compulsion of buying shit food. Oh, I buy it for the kids. The kids don't frigging need it any more than you do, right? There's so many people, oh, I'm buying this for the kids, but it's actually they're buying it for them, but they're just justifying it for their kids.
Just one other little thing I was just going to mention on the food thing in the fridge is that a lot of people associate healthy with boring. You have to put a little bit of time and energy into figuring out 2, 3, 4 meals, 2, 3, 4 snacks that are genuinely delicious, that you look forward to eating. Like you put it in your mouth and you're like, oh, like this is awesome. I love this, and it's healthy. How amazing is that, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a very good strategy, actually, because we do still need to enjoy our food, right? That's the key thing. You can't live a life eating bland stuff. Well, you can, but you've probably got orthorexia, which is another different conversation. So so that's a little bit of guidance around people setting up their built environment. There's lots you've talked about really understanding the levers. couple of things I want to talk about now. You did mention the word values. I'm massive on this one. And look, for me, to throw out the alcohol example, the one thing that has massively lowered my alcohol consumption to the point where I might have to give up my Irish passport is connecting to the value of authenticity. So being authentic is a deeply held value of mine. I talk about a lot of this stuff in front of people, but for me, it's about, I can't stand up and talk about the stuff if I'm not doing the behavior. So for me, it's being authentic is the stuff that drives me to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning, like I did this morning, jump into my freezing cold swimming pool before getting on a call, right? But it's also that authenticity was the stuff that actually made me significantly cut down. So how much do you do on values, and do you have any guiding principles for people around unlocking their values and focusing on those and on their journey?
Yeah, except we do it through a lens of motivation. And what I mean by that is that what I get people to do in the beginning is to do a sort of a hierarchy or a pyramid, sort of, if you imagine a pyramid of a hierarchy of motivations. And the way that I think about it is that some days you'll wake up and you'll want the abs. You know, you want to lose weight and you're like, today I'm going to the gym because, I want to look good. I want to look hot. I want to have some good sex, whatever it is, And for the woman, it might be something similar, or it might be, I want the bikini body, let's go. And then you'll wake up tomorrow and, and be like, you know what? Fuck the abs. I don't care. Right? And so this hierarchy of priorities is that the idea here is that on the day that priority one doesn't work or motivation one doesn't work, is that you go to the next layer of depth. And for me, so thing one is like fit, healthy, attractive body, right? That I'm proud of and that other people can look at and be like, oh, Matty is a fit guy, right? And layer two, when I'm like, who cares about abs? Like, it's, that's so superficial, Matty. Like, get deeper. But day two is about my mental health, right?
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, sure, don't care about abs today, but I know that for long periods of time of not physically exercising, I can go to some pretty dark places in my head. And so, awesome. Then level three might be, you're the host of the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. Like, you can't be seen, which is the authenticity one,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so this is what I get people to do, is layers of motivations. And it's like, when the other 5 motivations don't work, what gets you out?
It
might not be weight loss.
Right. That's
it might not be weight loss. It might not be mental health that day, but it might be that if I don't do this for my kids, I'm going to have sick kids, that'll die young, right? But another day, it might be the weight loss that gets you motivated.
Classic self-determination theory by Decky and Ryan, right? Crossing the threshold of autonomy. I'll tell you a little story on this one. The best one I've ever seen is that some lady stopped me in the street years ago and grabbed me and went, Paul Taylor. And she went, you made me cry in front of about 300 people. And I started apologizing to her. And she's like, no, it's all good. And it turns out she'd worked for a big life insurer. I'd done a workshop and we were talking about behavior change, health behavior change. And I asked if there was anybody who was struggling to change a behavior and was happy to do role play. And she jumped straight up and she went, me. And I went, okay, so what behavior do you want to change? And she's like, I want to stop smoking. I'm like, okay, why is that important to you? Right? And she said, because it's not good for my health. And then I dug. And then she just burst into tears. And she said, my 2 kids who are 8 and 6 came into my room last week in floods of tears because the 8-year-old saw an advert on TV that says smoking causes lung cancer. And she said they had been to my mother's funeral 3 months ago and somebody had talked about her dying of lung cancer. So the 8-year-old made the connection, told his little brother, Mum's going to die. And they both came into the room going, Mum, we don't want you to die. And I said to her, bingo, there's your why. Because I was talking about finding your why, right? And I said, you need to remember that every single day, right? And get up in the morning and go, just for today, I'm not going to smoke, and remember your why. And you know what she showed me? She tattooed her foot and it said, remember your why. And she had the initials of her 2 little boys. And she said she tweaked what I'd advised her. And she said she'd stand in the shower every day in the morning and she'd look at her foot and she'd go, just for today, I'm not going to smoke. And she said she started wearing open top shoes to work. And she made a deal. She was allowed to smoke if she looked at her foot first. And she said on at least 100 occasions she went for the cigarettes, remembered her deal, and that's when she looked at her foot, right? And
that's so
remembered
impressive.
her why, right? So tattoos, people. Tattoos are the way ahead if you want to change your behavior.
Oh, no, that's awesome. And it's the same idea, but my theory with the sort of hierarchy is that sometimes the core why isn't powerful enough because you're tired, because because you're tired, because the kids are annoying, because work sucks, because bad luck's come your way, whatever. So we need multiple that might need to leverage you up to sort of be like, all right, with a bit of this and 5% of that one and 10% of that one and 50%, yeah, all right, I'll do the healthy thing.
Yeah, and sometimes you probably don't need to roll out the big guns, right? Sometimes your first level one. That's why I really like what you're saying about having that hierarchy of motivations, because it's different levers that you can pull at different times. Okay, so big question. I know we don't have much left, but I got to ask you this $1 million question. So many people self-sabotage. What are some of the things that people can do to help them not to self-sabotage? And why do we do it?
That is the $1 million question. Why do we self-sabotage? Why does any human do anything that's not helpful for themselves, right? Because any animal that is not under human control is 100% looking after themselves or the tribe, right? So we're one of the only animals that's self-destructive in that way. But I think there's a lot of psychological reasons why we do it. Some people grow up with a narrative that they're not good enough.
Not good enough, yep.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Sometimes it can be social. I can't be seen to be doing too well. Australia's really bad for tall poppy syndrome.
Yep.
So we bring ourselves back down. We want to make sure that, again, we belong and we fit in and that we're not judged, and we're not, if you stick your head up too high, you might get it chopped off, that type of thing. But I think the main thing is that we need to create an environment where it's okay to succeed and we're celebrated for progress. Another little strategy for self-sabotage, and I'm not sure if you've heard anyone talk about this before, but is that there's somewhere in many people's core needs or drivers for their life is like rebellion and fighting against the system. And that might have been from a really oppressive parent. And I would say that that's me, right? I'm the person who was naturally extroverted, like really sort of out there, challenging every boundary, pushing everything. And so I have learned that if I do not have an outlet for that rebellion, it comes out in my relationship, in my food. And so I literally gave this to one of my one-on-one clients yesterday. I said, go and put together a list of ways in your life, anywhere in your life or anywhere in the world where you could actively engage in rebellion that allows that part of yourself to be nourished. For me, leaving the medical system and running a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die is my rebellion. Racing go-karts every Wednesday night is part of my rebellion.
Yeah,
right? And
nice.
so when I scratch that rebellion itch, it doesn't come out in unhealthy ways in my day-to-day life.
That is super interesting. You know, my wife Carly's going to be listening to this and going, that's you. He's talking about you, right? Because for me, and it's linked to rebellion, novelty is a big fan of novelty. And I'm always wanting to move house. Every few years, I want to move house. And we're in a freaking great house at the minute. And I was, a couple of years ago, agitating to move house. And Carly said to me, can you just piss off and satisfy your novelty gene in some way other than us having to uproot and completely move our house? And then I realized, actually, yes, I do. I love a bit of novelty in there, so I'm finding it in different ways. But that's really interesting, right? So, Matty, I could go on all day because this is a super interesting conversation, but all good things must come to an end. But I think all of our listeners would have got a great amount of value out of this. So tell us, where can the listeners go to find out more about your products and offering and any courses that you might be offering for the public?
Yeah, so just similar to this podcast, I've got a show, How to Not Get Sick and Die, which you've been on before, Paul. So whichever podcast app you're on, check that out, How to Not Get Sick and Die. We're almost at 400 episodes, which is pretty cool. Also my website, mattylansdown.com. And yeah, we run an emotional binge and overeating program called Mind Body Nourishment, which is for anyone that's sort of done 10, 20, 30 years dieting back and forth and can't figure out why they won't do the thing they know that they should. So we help that kind of person, man or woman, so feel free to reach out.